It is my great pleasure to introduce to you tonight Drew Spatz, who's been with the survey for a full 7 months and has already made an impact on our organization. We're very happy to have him. You know how, I usually give like some personal story about our speakers. Yeah, sorry, I got nothing. That was about the extent of it. I have not yet had the pleasure of working with Drew. All I know is that everyone who does says he's a great guy. Right, Chris, will you back me up on this? Yeah, all right. So Chris shows stamp of approval. Drew Spatz, we're very excited to. Now, I will give you a warning. He has not defended this work yet for his master's. So we're the. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, my bad. So we're the warm up. So I don't want you guys to go easy on him. Like, we need to get him ready for the thesis defense here. So let's.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
That's right. Okay. Enough of Drew Spatz.
Thank you, Al. Yeah, so I am finishing up my dissertation now, kind of just working on edits back and forth with my advisor. This is the first chapter of my defense. It's the one that I kind of started at Lehigh with, thanks to Frank Pizzalia. He kind of led me onto this Newark Basin path, but this chapter has really evolved over time. It was first when I got to Lehigh, got started on it, started with just doing detrital zircon geochronology, thought it'd just be, you see this age and you go and find its source. We quickly found out it's not that simple along the Atlantic coastal plain. So even though this was my first study, it was kind of the last one to finish up because it kind of evolved over time into what it is now, which is kind of a more holistic approach to provenance questions, provenance studies, where still using detrital zircon, but you're also supplementing that with other data, other information, other ways to kind of chase the actual answer of where these different sediments are sourced from. This laser pointer, there we go. Cool. So just a little bit of background for those not too familiar. There's heavy mineral or provenance analysis really started with just kind of looking at the heavy minerals of sediment deposits in a basin or a sink. And some heavy minerals, for example, apatite, zircon, garnet, and basically trying to tie the composition that's in a sediment back to its source or sources. So each of these heavy minerals have a characteristic paragenesis. So apatite, zircon, more igneous focused. Minerals like garnet, metamorphic, pyroxenes are a mafic igneous source. So you can kind of see what is in your sediment and then look around at the different sources to kind of try and tie it back to where the sediment originated. There's also, you can also calculate heavy mineral index ratios. These, or at least what I am using, are from Andy Morton and company. They put together these ratios that are both from minerals that are resistant to diagenesis and also have similar hydraulic properties. So you can kind of compare and contrast to try and chase changes in provenance throughout a basin deposit. And then later on, where I kind of come in with this, is using LA ICP-MS to date large quantities of these heavy minerals. So the classic example, the one that I used, was detrital zircon uranium lead geochronology, where basically, if you have a sink sample down here, you collect a lot of sediment from it, date a couple hundred of the zircon grains that are in it using the uranium lead method, and basically plot the ages up and see what the distribution of ages looks like to hopefully be able to tie it back to a source. So in this case, source A and source C, these mountains back here, were depositing sediment into this basin. So you can kind of tie it back to where they originated. But like many things in geology, it's usually not that simple. So I found out, thinking that this would be a cut and dry first chapter, there are many different issues when you're trying to tie back to a unique source or a particular source through detrital zircon or any other heavy mineral technique. There's many different factors that influence the final composition of sediment, and each heavy mineral phase responds differently to these factors. So in the case of zircon, it's very resilient to weathering, so it just kind of sticks around for it, which is kind of what I'm showing up in this image here. We have two different sources feeding a sink, but what if later on some other sources come in and feed that sink? And what if that sink itself becomes a source for another sink or basin down the line? And you just get this hodgepodge. So when you think you have just a nice, simple cut and dry source to sink system, it actually turns out to be something more like this, where you have a range of ages. They're not coming from one particular source, but a range of sources. How do you go about disentangling all those different signatures? And that's kind of where I want to come in with trying to use some different techniques to try and get at those answers. So this is from Gian et al. 2023, where you basically just incorporate other branches of geology or other heavy mineral techniques into these provenance studies. So in this case, if you look at this map, I put this red box around DHG and HS, these two different basin samples. And these are pie charts that show the age composition of detrital zircons in these two samples. So here's the key up here with the different age ranges. Each different age range probably ties back to a certain terrain or certain source. And if you just looked at the detrital zircon, they're fairly similar age populations between them. They have the same major ones, maybe small differences in amount, but that could be hydraulic sorting, that could be anything causing that small variation. And if you look at their heavy mineral compositions, they're also fairly similar down here. Also, again, a little bit of differences in compositions, but the main sources are all still there. So what they did to try and get at if they were from the same source or if they are from different sources was to tie in other things. So here, these are conglomerate class and what the composition of those class were mainly. And you can see a large difference between the two samples. And then also doing paleocurrent estimations. So one coming from a source coming from the south, one more from the north. And that basically led them to be able to find these two very different source regions that were supplying sediment, despite how similar the detrital zircon ages looked. So this is just an example of where using just one heavy mineral technique might lead you astray without looking at some of the other data in there. So for my work, I focused on the Newark Basin. It's a good place for a provenance study because at least for a good amount of its history, it's been hydrologically closed, or we think it is, from all the lake deposits in it, meaning that it will preserve a good amount of the sediment that came into the system, minus erosion over time. But being able to preserve all that sediment is important for provenance studies because you need to be able to characterize and find all those different sources for when you're trying to tie it back to where all the sediment came from. It's also very well studied. There have been many different works from Olson et al. And others, and it is age constrained as well. So what this study turned into over time, again, it started as just like detrital zircon, just taking a couple samples, trying to see where they came from, into this kind of paired detrital zircon, uranium lead, and heavy mineral study, looking to constrain Newark Basin provenance. And my goals for this were to reconstruct pre-camp, that is the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, SynRIF drainage systems of the basin. I just focused on the pre-camp units of the Newark Basin because that provides good age control when you're trying to reconstruct drainage systems into the basin. The Atlantic Magmatic Province has been dated by zircon, uranium, lead, so it gives me a nice top age to where I can then kind of work back from there. Also wanted to test the hypothesis that the largest drainage systems into a rift basin come from axially from the hanging wall, as Gothorpe and Leader pointed out. I'll talk more about this figure later. And then also just study the SynRIF drainage development of a rift basin, because the data that I'm collecting can be used for that. So why not kind of tie that in and tell a story about it? So I'm going to do just a quick background, basic geology of the Newark Basin, at least the pre-camp units, the Stockton, Lockatong, and Passaic formations. There are a couple others in the basin, Boonton, Tawaco, Feltville, that are kind of intercalated with the basaltic flows of the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, and other papers have talked about those in more detail. So just real briefly, the Stockton Formation, it's just a graded to meandering fluvial deposit. It's reddish brown siltstone, mudstone, cross-bedded sandstone, and conglomerates. Mainly, it has been interpreted to be deposited in small transverse, kind of these transverse fluvial systems into the early Newark Basin. This is a picture of a general section I found from the FCOPG guidebook from 2018, just to kind of give a representative idea of what the Stockton represents. The Lakatong in the middle, this is where you get your shallow to deep playa lake deposits. They're organic rich. Some include aquatic fossils. This again was from the 2018 guidebook. And it's thought that, at least in the Lakatong, this is maybe when we're starting to see some of those more axially derived systems, these larger systems where sediment supply is not keeping pace with the amount of drainage into the system. So you're getting these larger drainages coming in. And then by Passaic Formation time, we're getting just red and gray siltstone, mudstones, a little bit of sandstone. These are mostly fluvial, shoreline to shallow lake environments. What's nice or helpful for my study, in at least in the northern Newark Basin up in here, all of these units are the Passaic from mudstone, siltstone to sandstone conglomerate, is that there has been paleocurrent analysis in the northern Newark Basin showing a steady kind of northward drainage system coming into the basin axially. So it kind of helps me to test my data against what's already been found here. There have also been well-characterized source regions for the Newark Basin. And what's nice is there's a lot of heterogeneity in these source regions. So you have multiple periods of orogenesis, rifting, passive margin development, continental collisions that have kind of created all of these heterogeneous domains and terrains of the area that surrounds the Newark Basin. Foster Barrel and Stockley in 2023 put out a really good paper. This is where this figure originates from. And you see each of these source regions, they have collected data from many different sources to actually summarize the detrital zircon uranium lead age components in each of these different source regions. So basically by taking Newark Basin samples and dating them with detrital zircon, we can at least try and start to get at which different sources were feeding the basin over time and throughout the different locations. So as I was talking about that Foster Barrel and Stockley study, again, these are their summarized detrital zircon age spectra. These are shown as kernel density estimates. They basically just summarize the probability that any one zircon grain from that sample will be at that particular age, if that makes sense. So basically, the higher these bars are, the more likely or the more zircons from that sample that are that age, if that makes sense. So see on the x-axis age in millions of years, basically higher it is, more zircons in that sample are of that age population. And basically what they found from sampling the Passaic, Lakatong, and Stockton formations here was that in the early Sinrift period, so your Carnian, early Norian, this is Stockton deposition and into the Lakatong. What you basically have are, and I'll summarize this again later, I just wanted to kind of go over this quick. You have these transverse drainages coming off both the footwall from Laurentian sources over here, this is your Grenville Blue Ridge, Laurentian foreland, and then also from the east, coming in from the hanging wall. All of this blue is buried Peri-Gondwanan terrains they're just buried beneath the Atlantic coastal plain, but their signatures are consistent with Peri-Gondwanan origin. Whereas then in the Passaic formation, again, just like those paleocurrent estimates show, the detrital zircon age spectra from these samples more align with Laurentian signatures, so your Grenville Blue Ridge, Laurentian foreland. But they also still have this big Pan-African component, which is a Peri-Gondwanan one. So I don't know why they didn't show another arrow coming in from the east as well, but I would put one there, still bringing that Peri-Gondwanan stuff into the Newark Basin axially as well. So these kind of just give me a basis to kind of then use my data, test a couple hypotheses from this Foster Barrel and Stockley paper that helpfully came out kind of as I was trying to summarize my paper. It kind of gave me a good starting point. So what I did, I was collected 23 whole rock samples from Passaic, Lakatong, Stockton formation, tried to cover as much of the basin as I could just to characterize all of the different potential sources. And I also had 5 additional detrital zircon uranium lead samples that were previously unpublished from Frank Bazaglia and Tom Becker that are going to be included in this manuscript. So I'm not going to go through this too much, other than to mention that when trying to separate heavy minerals, I really try to to minimize alterations or anything that could influence the population of mitotrital zircon ages. You want to get the representative population of the grain. You don't want to do anything like magnetic separation that could possibly bias your results. So just use a jaw crusher if needed. I also used a disc mill to get to a particular size range that we were looking for. And then heavy liquid separation was the big one here to separate out the different heavy mineral sources. The heavy mineral analysis itself was done by Andy Morton at HM Research Associates in the UK. Basically, what he did was he ID'd the heavy mineral populations of each sample. He took 100 grains at random from each sample and basically just ID'd them either using morphology, because they each have kind of a characteristic look to them. But if it wasn't clear, he also used cathodoluminescence, backscatter electron imaging, and scanning electron microscopy as well. And then for the detrital zircon geochronology, this was done at the University of Arizona Laserchron Center. I basically picked which samples to do DZ work on based on changes in the heavy mineral assemblages between samples or on specific stratigraphic intervals. This technique is much more expensive, so I really wanted to make sure I was getting the most bang for my buck in this case. Dated at least 150 zircon grains per sample, which has been shown to get you to about 95% confidence that you have a representative population of the entire sample. And I also use detrital pi for data visualization. So those kernel density estimators I talked about, like this down here, that's the program that I use to create those. So I'm not going to touch too much on these couple of figures other than because we'll talk about them in just a little bit. But some of my results, the heavy mineral assemblages, again, I'm sure you can't see it. We'll get into each one of those on future slides. But basically, there were 10 main heavy mineral species that helped to kind of compare and contrast between all of the 23 different samples. And I plotted them up here by percent composition. But again, we'll get into those in a little bit. And then those heavy mineral index values, these are good, again, because these are a set of minerals that have similar hydraulic behavior. So you can kind of see where one of the two is enriched, where some aren't. And it's really good for tracking changes in provenance between samples. And then again, the detrital zircon uranium lead geochronology. So I had 6 new samples done, and then the one from Frank Pazzalia is the diamond here, this HT sample, and all of the stars are samples from Tom Becker. And basically what I did when I was plotting up these KDEs is split this up based on the various domains and terrains of the source regions around the Newark Basin. So that's what this table is showing. Laurentian orogenesis, that's all your blue and green colors on here. The Pan-African ages, that's a big Peri-Gondwanan signature, is all these oranges. Grenville is your blue. Granite rhyolite is this tan here. And then recycled craton are these little pink peaks that show up in some of the samples. So this was kind of the point that I was at was, well, what does it all mean? These different age spectra, they don't, for the most part, they don't conform nicely to any one of these different source regions. So that's when I kind of had to think about, well, what else can we do to try and get at what sources we're feeding all of these different sediments? And that's where the heavy mineral work comes in, the previous geologic work, the paleocurrent estimations come in. But one additional thing that I've been talking about with Tom Becker was to also do a kind of sediment volume estimation for the different, or for the Newark Basin itself. And I'll get into kind of how I did that. But basically, we're going under the assumption, and this is from Milliman-Spitsky in 1992, that roughly the volume of sediment in a depositional system, so the sediment in a basin coming from a particular drainage system, will scale to the size of its associated source. So based on that, what I wanted to do was define and delineate the clastic sediment of the Newark Basin by depositional system. So we can kind of get at a relative size comparison between the different systems to then act as a check on our source interpretations. So you're not going to have some small mudstone deposit from a source that's say like 1,000 square kilometers or something like that, as a basic example. So to get at defining and delineating the basin, the first thing was to kind of just define the extent. What is the sediment body extent of the Newark Basin? So the up dip to down dip limits, these yellow and orange lines, basically were just drawn parallel to the basin margins. The only case where it became a little tricky was when part of the basin margins were buried under the Atlantic coastal plain. So then I just had to use previous seismic interpretation. So here's one from Reynolds in 1994, Dave Reynolds, but also from Martha Withjack has a couple of them that were very helpful for that. Then the along strike limits, these purple and blue lines, they were largely, again, just drawn perpendicular to the basin margins, except in the south here. Still not sure exactly how to draw that one because you get this interfingering with the narrow neck region. So where do you define that end point of the Newark Basin in that area? And I just kind of went off what Schlischa did in 1992 for that first pass. So that's the sediment body defined, but now we have to delineate it by depositional system. So I'll walk through kind of how I did that into these. You see these Roman numerals. Basically, I put it into 5 different depositional systems for the Newark Basin. These were based on stratigraphic relationships, previous studies, but also largely on changes in my detrital zircon or heavy mineral signatures. And these delineations, it has to be said, are approximations because there's interfingering all through the Newark Basin. There's no, I don't think, one perfect way to do this. So these are my best approximations at getting these different depositional systems separated out to at least try and get at how big was the source feeding each of these systems. So I'm going to walk through these and kind of how I delineated each of them individually. For the northern Newark Basin up in here, there's 2 different depositional systems, 1 and 2. One is in white lines just because it represents just the Stockton formation. So there's no good way really with this image, at least to show it in 3D. These are vertical differences. So system 1 is the Stockton, clastic portions of the Lakatong. System 2, this gray line here, is the Passaic formation. And basically how I delineated that, AS69 here is system 1, and then 75 and 72 are system 2. These are their detrital zircon age populations, just shown as pie charts. Was system 1's boundaries, at least laterally, were the extent of the Stockton formation, just based on seismic interpretation for this area, since it's mostly buried. And system 2 is based on this mapped extent of the actually derived sediment body. So you'll see it, system 2 kind of cuts through here. That's because I'm just taking out the units that were deposited temporally with the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. So taking those out of the picture for this work. But then the boundary between the 2, that vertical boundary from the Stockton Lakatong to the Passaic, is based on their changes. Here you see changes in their HM index ratios between a 6970, which they're pretty variable themselves. I'll talk about that on the next slide. But you see very different signatures compared to system 2 here, showing a raised ATI ratio, but also rutile, titanium dioxide minerals, and monazite as well. So very broad signatures shown in system 2. So for the central Newark Basin, again, 2 depositional systems here, 3 and 4. And I'll get into the provenance after this. I just wanted to kind of go through splitting this up quick. Basically for system 3, this large system in here, the boundaries for this, there's a rider block in the southern extent. You can't see it too well because there's just so many pie charts here. But so that defined the southern extent of system 3, but also there are changes in detrital zircon, uranium, lead, and HM data that between here, you see system 3, all of these major orange Pan-African ages define system 3, where system 4 down below here has much more of this Grenville Blue Ridge signature that is characteristic of Laurentian rock. So it kind of helped split these 2 systems from each other. And I also should mention that some of these, like all these PC samples, anything with a triangle, that's coming from Foster Barrel and Stockley, their 2023 study. So I'm combining basically just all the data I have to try and throw it at these provenance works. And finally, for the southern Newark Basin, is system 5 down here. And again, this was the extent of this system was estimated based on that rider block, again, for this northern extent, but then also changes in their detrital zircon spectra. So you'll see it was hard to show them all at once, but this is kind of looking like a mix of systems 3 and 4. So it has its own characteristic population, these 5 samples. And then with it delineated, then I could get at size estimates. And this is a part where I'm running out of time now because I need to defend. So I haven't quantified it yet. That is going to be the next step. But I thought I could at least provide estimates for comparing between the sizes of these different depositional systems, because you can calculate just the area of these different polygons, but also estimate the sediment thickness range of each region just using the seismic interpretations that we have. So going through that, I'm not going to go through these too much other than to point out that systems 1 and 4 are noticeably smaller, so in area and in thickness, than systems 2, 3, and 5. And that'll be important for source interpretations as we go through. And if you have questions about this, we can come back to. So with all of that information, all the data, the size estimates, then now it kind of felt more confident that we could go about doing provenance source interpretations and eventually getting to actually reconstructing the syn rift drainages of this basin. So for the provenance, for system 1, we just have one sample because again, this is just the Stockton formation of this part, and it isn't well exposed except for kind of along the river here near the edge of the Newark Basin. But basically what you're seeing is a dominant 250, 340 million year signature and a 500 to 700 million year signature. That doesn't match any of these exactly. So you have some kind of combination at work here. You have a Peri-Gondwanan signature from one of these terrains with that Pan-African, but then you also have these blue Laurentian orogenesis rocks that could be Peri-Laurentian, Peri-Gondwanan even as well, if you think about the Goochland terrain. So that's where then you bring in some of these other data sets that we have from this work. One of the nice things about doing detrital zircon studies is you can also calculate uranium-thorium ratios from each of the zircons you date. And this is an oversimplification, but from past work from Rubato in 2002, I used a uranium-thorium ratio as 10 as a cutoff, where a ratio greater than 10 is a metamorphic originated zircon, a ratio of less than 10, igneous zircon. So it helps to better get at, do you have an igneous source, a metamorphic source, do you have a mix of both? Where are these zircons coming from? And then using just the heavy mineral assemblages themselves, which in this case for system 1 also show a mix of igneous signatures from monazite, zircon, but also you have some metamorphic signatures from rutile, from garnet, showing that there's a little bit of a mix of sourcing going on here. So when I was going about doing syn rift drainage reconstruction for system 1, you have to look at, like I said back in that table, it's a relatively small depositional system, sediment-wise. It has igneous and metamorphic heavy mineral signatures, and then it has these 250 to 340 million year and 500 to 700 million year ages. And that matches or drives well with a both Peri-Laurentian, giving you igneous and metamorphic rock, this 250, 340 million year signature, but also Peri-Gondwanan with the igneous rocks and this Pan-African detrital zircon uranium lead signature. So putting that all together, it could relatively easily be explained by transverse hanging wall drainages that are coming from Peri-Gondwanan and Peri-Laurentian highlands that are just to the east of the Newark Basin here. So then system 2, again, has a variety of dominant ages. This major 410 to 500 million year peak, Grenville peak here, and then also you're still getting some of that Pan-African signature as well. So again, we're not matching any of these in particular, and you have to get at what the mix of signatures that you're actually seeing is. So again, from these different samples in system 2, we have, again, a mix of igneous metamorphic heavy mineral signatures, rutile, tourmaline, metamorphic rock, zircon, apatite, igneous, more igneous. Zircon can be metamorphic too. And for reconstructing this one, it's a large depositional system. System 2 is the largest of the 5. It has igneous metamorphic signatures, a wide array of those detrital zircon uranium lead age signatures, and also helpfully for this one, we have those paleocurrent estimates from Parker et al. In 1988 that show a northern drainage system for the Passaic in this region. And basically, what I think we have going on here is an integrated both Laurentian, these igneous metamorphic rocks, and Peri-Gondwanan still from the west, axial drainage system that is feeding into the Newark Basin from the north during Passaic deposition. System 3 was a little bit more straightforward. You see this dominant Pan-African signal. It looks almost exactly like Gandaria or Avalonia, these Peri-Gondwanan terrains. But we'll still go through the process. Heavy mineral data, mainly igneous, at least detrital zircon uranium thorium ratios. This one has some metamorphic stuff in it that I'll tell you what I think is happening, but open to other suggestions too. And then the heavy mineral assemblage, unfortunately, again, only one sample from this system, but it's showing these heavy pyroxenes, big mafic source, a little bit of tourmaline, a little bit of zircon as well. So for the most part, igneous signatures, heavy mineral signatures, Pan-African detrital zircon signatures. We also have paleocurrent estimates. These aren't published, but Dave Reynolds and Tom Becker did these when they were out trudging around in the Newark Basin, and they estimated an eastern paleocurrent for Stockton samples in this region. So what I think we have here is a major Peri-Gondwanan source. That's your Pan-African big detrital zircon age, but also maybe some Laurentian influence from those metamorphic signatures that we have, and also those smaller detrital zircon ages. I couldn't fit it all on one map, so I'm just going to go back quickly. Like your Grenville signature here, that could be a little bit of a Laurentian influence as well coming into these rocks, or these sediments. System 4, again, this one shows, this just looks like Laurentian. This looks like Laurentian Foreland or Grenville Blue Ridge. But what's nice about doing the heavy mineral stuff, we can get more specific for each of these samples and where it's coming from, more than just saying it's a Laurentian signal. Where when you look at the actual HM assemblages, especially, I mean, here you're getting mostly dominant igneous, but I also have more heavy mineral samples, again, because that was cheaper. It's easier to do than detrital zircon. Some just show a dominant igneous signal, like this one's just about all zircon, all apatite and zircon, igneous rock. But then others show a lot of epidote, tourmaline, rutile, kind of more of a mixed metamorphic and igneous signature, depending on which sample and which location. And I will deconstruct this more as I go forward with the work, but for now, basically what I think System 4 is this is that second small depositional system, has Laurentian age signatures, but then some samples, again, are igneous, heavy mineral dominated. Some have a mix of igneous and metamorphic. So obviously we have Laurentian sources, but I think some are more Grenville dominated, while others are Laurentian Foreland dominated signatures. And basically based on where that sample is, I think we can kind of get at reconstructing either a Grenville dominated drainage or a Laurentian Foreland. So basically what's happening in System 4, you have multiple transverse footwall drainage systems. These are small systems that are all kind of feeding in rock of variable lithologies throughout the Laurentian region. And then finally, System 5, this is similar to Systems 1 and 3, showing 250 to 340 and then the Pan-African age signatures. However, the Passaic samples, these three that I have pointed out, they're all from Foster Bell and Stockley in 2023. They have some different age signatures, some more Laurentian signatures from a larger Grenville Blue Ridge province, this green or blue age signature. So when you look at the uranium thorium data here and the heavy mineral assemblages, we're also seeing a mix of igneous and metamorphic signatures, which would say that this probably isn't just a Peri-Gondwanan source. So what I think is happening in this system is down here, System 5, you have a mix of Peri-Laurentian rock coming in, a little bit of igneous and metamorphic detrital zircon. and Peri-Gondwanan ages coming in, but then also by Passaic deposition, you're also forming this axial system that's coming in from the south and starts to feed Laurentian rocks as well into system 5. So basically at the beginning, the Stockton samples, to just go back really quick, they have a Peri-Gondwanan and Peri-Laurentian signature, similar to these sources down here, and then Peri-Laurentian right here. But then by Passaic time, you're seeing more of that Laurentian signature come into this system. So I think at the beginning, again, you have this transverse hanging wall drainage, but by Passaic deposition, an axial drainage is starting to interfinger into that system, and you're getting a mix of both of those signatures coming in. So just to tie it all together, I'm taking this from Gawthorpe and Leader just because these are really nice figures that I think that kind of represent these different stages of rift drainage development. Basically, your early Sin Rift, Stockton, and some of the Lockatong Formation. I think we have numerous small drainage systems. These are confined like to small grabens and offset faults along here, and that would explain the heterogeneity between the system 4 samples that we saw. So there are all these small little footwall drainages coming in from this case in the west. So again, all of these little things where their detrital zircon ages are similar just because zircon is so resistant, it gets recycled multiple times. You get a little bit of homogeneity in there, but then the heavy mineral data shows the actual heterogeneity that's happening between these small little drainage systems. And then by the Middleton Rift, when you're depositing your Passaic formation, I think you're getting these offset faults that are growing and coalescing. They can become border faults and accommodate most of the extension that's going on in this half graben. And over time, you get a basin that is filled dominantly by axial systems. So think about, in the case of the Newark Basin, system 2 coming in here, this big axial system. It's an big integrated drainage, both Laurentian, Peri-Gondwanan rocks coming in, but also in the south. This arrow should probably be larger. I think is most of this Passaic deposition down here is from this axial southern system that is coming into the basin as the rift continues. So that's where I stopped that chapter to actually get at defending my thesis. But what I really want to do next is actually start and try to do some quantitative work to even better estimate the sources and the drainage systems that fed the Newark Basin. So I've kind of started that process. You saw this on the title slide by creating basically isopachs for sediment in the Newark Basin from 0 to 6 kilometers. This is what is currently in the Newark Basin. I've only used the seismic interpretations, but I also want to tie in borehole data to refine these a little bit. So this was kind of my first attempt at it. And then I also used work from Withjack 2013 and 2020, where they did erosion estimates for the Newark Basin and basically trying to get at what was the original size of the basin. And I made these max sediment isopachs basically just off of her erosion estimates from all the way up to about 9 kilometers of thickness in some areas of the basin. So basically what I want to do with this is then we have the actual calculated volume of sediment in the basin. I want to divide that between the 5 depositional systems. And so you have those volume estimates for each depositional system. You can then combine that with denudation rate estimates for the different source areas. Years of deposition, that's why I capped it at pre-Central Atlantic magmatic province, because that's a very nice hard line at about 201 million years. And also paleogeographic maps. I've been talking with Bill Hines, who has these reconstructed paleogeographic maps for the Triassic in this area. And basically, I want to start looking at how to quantify source area sizes, but then also use those paleogeographic maps to both determine source locations and their drainage system geometry. So we can better estimate kind of what were the sources, what were the drainage systems that fed the Newark Basin through time. And that's it. I'll take any questions if we have time. And thanks to Frank Pizzalia and Tom Becker, who have done a lot of help with this work.
Lots of time for questions. So you said next chapter. Like, what exactly are you defending? Like, wait, is this, no, I mean, like, is this ever going to end, or, you know, what's?
No. So when I came into Lehigh, my advisor kind of sold me on a Mongolia project that ended up just not getting funded. So I kind of had to create my own 3 chapters. So this Newark Basin work was just going to be 1 chapter. And it is for the point of the defense. I have 2 other chapters, both using geothermal one in New England and then one doing a technique development on muscovite. So for the purposes of the defense, that's it. But
There's 3 chapters.
yes,
Okay, but
Yes.
we only saw 1.
right.
Okay.
But this future work, I'm just interested in the Newark Basin, so I want to keep going after. Yeah, I had to draw the line.
All right, any questions? And remember, we have to repeat the question because we have a direction.
Right.
Well, no, Ken always gets the first one.
Oh, no.
You got it? No?
I appreciate this because when I had to do a thesis, my professor wouldn't allow me to do anything like this. I wanted to just concentrate on space. My main question is, why do you not map Passaic Formation in Passaic, New Jersey? I never thought that Stockton was located in the Passaic Valley of New Jersey. I always thought the Passaic Formation was in the Passaic Valley, east of the first Watchung Mountain, because I grew up over there and made that assumption. And also, maybe can you give us an idea of why you differentiate between Region 1 and Region 2?
Mhm.
Because from looking at the rocks, the lithology is almost exactly the same.
Yeah, I need to find a better way, I think, to show this. But Region 1 here, it's in the subsurface. That is just the Stockton Formation buried below, where System 2 is the overlying Passaic. And it's just.
So that's not the surface geology.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for Systems 1 and 2. I tried with doing a different colored line, but I need to find a better way to kind of show that
Okay.
that's not at the surface.
Okay. All right. I'll accept it.
So what about the Passaic question?
Well, the Passaic is the overlying formation. It's the youngest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what you can see.
Yeah.
I don't know how they got the samples from depth that you mapped, but I didn't see anything in your mineralogy that would differentiate area 1 from area 2. I couldn't really tell based on your mineralogy, your histograms. They were so variable. I couldn't really.
I probably already skipped it. No, it's back here somewhere.
So there's the question: how did you get those here?
Oh no, they're all from the surface.
Okay.
The Stockton ones in System 1, they're only exposed. You can't see it because my extent line goes over it, but there's a little sliver of Stockton that outcrops along the east here, and that's where.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Otherwise, it is completely buried.
Okay.
I can't. It's probably back here. Yeah.
I always
Let me go
felt
back
that
here.
Stockton was South Jersey stuff. Those guys.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you have this little, again, can't really see it. There's a little bit there, that tan color, that's Stockton outcropping in northeast
right.
here. But again, they're detrital zircon ages. They have different populations from the Pan-African of the System 1 to this Grenville rhyolite, granite rhyolite province of Laurentian for System 2.
Adam.
Yeah, sitting here trying to think of the most pedantic question I could ask you. I think it's the best I could come up with, but so how concordant are your detrital zircon data? Because I'm just kind of curious if you see any kind of overprint from the Watchungs or Palisades and Diabates or something like that.
Yeah. That's right. How concordant are the detrital zircon ages? Because you might get overprints from
From the
Watchung
stuff.
Yeah. So the Arizona Lasercon Center, they have this whole system you go through. If it's more than 10% discordant, it just gets automatically kind of filtered out of your final data set. So I don't see any of those for the age populations. They have some like stock cutoffs that they found kind of just they're doing so much of the work. So I use what they give.
Any questions online? Just put them in the chat. Yeah, go for it.
Lots. Because I have lots of detrital zircon data
Nice.
from the Piedmont. So first of all, I'm going to do some narration here. Should I come up to
If you
me?
don't mind, we're having
Yeah.
problems with the mic.
Maybe I'll go back to that stuff.
Because he's not going to want to repeat.
Yeah,
All
appreciate it.
right, this.
So we have a pretty good idea that the formations, not the specific rocks, but the formations that we see on the surface now in the metamorphic rocks that surround the basin were exposed then because the sediments in the basin are deposited directly on top of that, right? So they had to be exposed. So you can take a look at the detrital zircon populations in those rocks and probably get a good idea of what the sources were.
Like the exact source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the, find this here. So the real Wissahickon, which is over here in Philadelphia and east of the Rosemont Fault. I can't point it out on here because it's not here, but I can point it out on the wall. Sorry, you all, online. So that's this part, just right way over here. Has a lot of Peri-Gondwanan signature in it. So that could be these rocks, in here could be a source of the Peri-Gondwanan. Some of that Peri-Gondwanan material.
Okay, and presumably probably further up if buried now,
and
but
we don't know what like I've never looked at New Jersey, so I don't know, and I don't know if they have any, if there is any zircon data, and then it gets buried. So conveniently gets buried under the coastal line.
Yeah.
The rest of the Piedmont down here, the rest of what used to be called Wissahickon, is pretty good, this Laurentian foreland, like this in here with the odd little doodad out here. So you can also go up to New England. I don't know where these compilations came from, but there's a lot of literature with a lot of sites. I actually have some samples from New York City. So I can share that data with you. I forget what it looks like.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of New England data around and a lot of Maryland data, but you didn't really go that far south. Yeah, but it's curious. I mean, when you get down here and you get so much of this Peri-Gondwanan signature, like Gandaria is only up in Canada. Like there is no Gander terrain. It's up here, right? So the likelihood of carrying that all the way down here, maybe that tells us that it's buried, but probably not. I think you need to look for something that's closer to the surface for that. But this is pretty cool. I
Yeah,
fascinated by all of this. But anyway, I have a lot of data.
please. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Jonathan.
That is suggesting that maybe the source rock for some of these hanging wall drainages may actually now be somewhere over in Morocco or something.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so Jonathan was saying basically that some of these,
It's suggesting perhaps.
yeah, suggesting that some of these signatures that we're seeing, or Peri-Gondwanan signatures that we're seeing that are along the hanging wall of the Newark Basin might now be in Morocco, or some of it post-drift took a boat ride across the Atlantic.
It's incredibly quiet online. Okay. Let's go back. Any other questions? So yeah, you outlined your next steps. What's interesting, just a coincidence, maybe. I don't know what we're going to call it, but we're publishing a three-dimensional model of the entire Mesozoic basin, the base of it. In fact, it has been published already. We just haven't given it enough fanfare. That's coming. But as part of the end of this project, Drew says, I'd like to sit in on one of these meetings. I had no idea. Like, he's the Newark Basin expert. Like, oh man, we should have had him involved much earlier on in the project. But we muddled along without him. So your next steps here is not so unrealistic. I mean, this is something that we could build on, because our 3D model that we publish is only just a first step. As everything in geology, right? We're starting, and then we'll build on it. So I think there's some future here in continuing this type of analysis.
Yeah, it's a happy little coincidence.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we didn't know that when we hired this guy. Or at least I didn't.
Well, we need to learn more
Yeah.
about the space.
Well, and that's the other thing that's this whole presentation, the whole thing I'm thinking is this is not simple, right? I mean, there's nothing about this basin that's straightforward.
No.
And
It's even, was it just one single basin? Was it connected to?
right. And then being a sedimentary geologist by training, I get annoyed at all the diabase just mucking things up. When it comes in and like, oh, well, I don't know what's going on now because we have these intrusives, bake zones, and yeah. So it's fascinating and infuriating at the same time, as any good geology project.
Yeah.
All right. So if there's no more questions, I've still got nothing on that. Okay. We've lulled them to sleep, I guess. Let's thank Drew again. Thank you for sharing. And do some I do have a couple more announcements. I want to get this